Josh Haston here, Jerusalem Minute on JNS TV. I am in Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people, along with Alex Traven, who is still on the monitor. He remained in the United States as the Prime Minister Netanyahu extended his trip after speaking to a joint session of Congress on Wednesday. Alex, good to see you over there in the U.S.
Good to see you as well, Josh.
So let's talk about the speech to Congress. But before we do that, unfortunately, we have to touch on another subject matter here in Israel. Top story, at least 12 Druze children murdered in a Hezbollah strike on a soccer field in northern Israel, the village of Majdal Shams. That's right near the Hermon area yesterday evening. Just a horrible, horrible scene coming out of northern Israel with 12 children murdered. I saw the video of their parents scrambling to see who was still alive and who unfortunately was killed. The funeral was just held several hours ago. Alex, tell us what you know about that horrible strike in the north.
Oh, this was a Iranian-made rocket. It was a rocket that had a 50-kilogram payload on it. This is like one of the more advanced rockets that Hezbollah has, and only Hezbollah has these rockets. So even as Hezbollah tried to deny responsibility, it was obvious to Israel who fired that rocket. It was it fired along with the salvo of Katyusha rockets at the Golan Heights. Majdal Shams is pretty far north. It's a Druze village. Druze, by and large, in Israel are very supportive of the state of Israel, even though they're Muslims. Many of them serve in the army. Many of them serve in the Israeli police force. And the question is here now with 12 killed, most of them children, and several dozen others injured. How Israel's going to respond to this, and do they value the lives of the Druze in Golan the same way they value the lives of Jews living in Tel Aviv? If this missile had hit and killed 12 people in Tel Aviv, what would be the response? And I think there's a lot of Israelis hoping that the response will be exactly the same if it's 12 Druze children living in the Golan Heights.
Yeah, Israel should not differentiate between children, whether they're in the north, south, or the center of the country. Hezbollah, of course, denying that they carried out this attack, yet there is just so much evidence indicating. I mean, Israel this morning, I saw maps indicating exactly where Hezbollah launched that missile from. So there's no doubt Hezbollah did it.
Josh, it's like Hezbollah saying, we didn't shoot those 20,000 rockets at you since the war started.
Yeah, it's completely. I heard one report saying that the reason they did it, obviously they're denying the fact they attacked Israel, is they're afraid that perhaps some of the Druze in Lebanon will go crazy and respond on their own, take matters into their own hands. And that's why they're really trying to vociferously deny that they launched those rockets and launched the missiles which killed those kids.
Yeah, you told a great story about how the Druze do that, so there is the threat. And that, I think, is the hope. I think Israel's hope is that the Lebanese people that are not part of Hezbollah, who don't want to see the entirety of Lebanon destroyed by a war, that they should get Hezbollah to pipe down and to calm the storm.
Yeah, so the story you're referring to, several years ago, there was a Druze man, for one reason or another, who was kidnapped to the town of Jenin under the Palestinian Authority. And the Druze from the north of Israel drove down, made their way to Jenin, and told the leaders there of the PA, if you don't return our man in 24 hours, we are going to raise all hell. There'll be no boundaries, no limits as to what we are going to do in order to get the man back. So the Druze don't play any games. And I think Israel, our government, should learn a little bit in terms of how to react to these types of attacks from the Druze.
Exactly. They understand the way this region works, and you have to be tough. If you're not the toughest player, you're going to be taken advantage of. And Israel's been rolled over time and time again. I'm not saying that they haven't responded, but it's very clear to everybody that Israel has not responded with full force in southern Lebanon since the war started. And if they don't respond with the full force that they have, and if they don't create damage so great that they restored deterrence, then there's not going to be any deterrence, and Hezbollah is going to continue to test the waters and see how much they can get away with, and that's what they're doing. And they're going to be watching now to see what Israel does in response to this attack.
So let's take a look. We have a clip here of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and this is what he said in a video via X last night after this horrible attack.
אזרחי ישראל, כמוכם הזדעזעתי הזדעזעתי לראות את התמונות הנוראות בעקבות המתקפה הרצחנית של חיזבאללה על מג'דל שמס. בין הנרצחים ילדים קטנים ששיחקו כדורגל וגם נרצחים אחרים. לב כולנו נשבר מהמראות הללו. אנחנו מחבקים את המשפחות, מחבקים את העדה הדרוזית כולה ברגעם הקשה, שהוא גם רגענו הקשה. מאז שהותקנתי באסון אני מקיים התייעצויות ביטחוניות רצופות. הנחיתי להקדים את שובנו לארץ. אני אכנס מיד את הקבינט הביטחוני עם הגעתי. אני יכול להגיד שמדינת ישראל לא תעבור על כך בשתיקה. לא נעבור על כך לסדר היום.
At the same time, you have Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz saying the Hezbollah attack crossed all red lines and the response will be accordingly. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich calling for the death of Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah as a result. And we will see pretty soon. The Prime Minister actually, after extending his trip to stay for the weekend, actually decided to come home earlier. He should be landing here any minute and then convening the Security Cabinet in order to discuss the situation in the north.
Yeah, the Prime Minister had to change his schedule in the United States last week and ultimately wasn't going to be able to make it back on time for the Jewish Sabbath. So the plan was to stay in Washington through the Sabbath, and the moment the Sabbath was over, to head to the airport and to get back. Once this attack happened, the Prime Minister decided to advance his return back, and the entire delegation actually left the United States on Shabbat in order to get back earlier. And you mentioned Israel Katz saying that this attack crossed every red line. I mean, this attack is so far past any red line. The red line should have been crossed a long, long time ago. Let's see now if this actually was the red line for Israel. I still have a feeling that the United States is going to pressure Israel and has already signaled that it's going to pressure Israel to try to de-escalate the conflict. So in other words, they're going to try to get Israel not to respond in full force because they're afraid of an all-out war between Hezbollah and Israel, a war that's been cooking now for 9 months. So we have to see. Israel may not respond with the fullest force that it has.
Yeah, I agree. Israel should be responding according to what Hezbollah does, not according to the actual casualty numbers. I think that should have been a policy from the beginning. But now I want to turn our attention, as this story continues to develop, to the United States. You were inside the room as Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed a joint session of Congress. Before we get into some of the main highlights of the speech, again, it was a long speech. We can't hit everything. But just your overall impression, actually being a spectator in the room, covering the talk of Prime Minister Netanyahu to a joint session.
Well, I think for everybody in the room, the speech was absolutely inspirational. Netanyahu is the grand orator and statesman, and he prepared a speech which was amazing, hit on all the points, had applause lines built into the speech. Every single one of them hit their mark. The first 10 minutes of the speech, I think every third sentence was an applause line, and there were people in the room that as soon as they would sit down, they were standing back up. There were people wondering if they should just stay on their feet the whole time because it was clear that he was going to say something that was going to make them get to their feet again. And I think for anybody that was watching that speech and heard, all the standing applause, would have seen that the overwhelming majority of the American leadership stand shoulder to shoulder with the state of Israel. And I think that was the major point. So even though you had some congressmen boycotting the speech, from what I can tell, it didn't look like that many weren't there at the beginning. Their seats were quickly filled by people that were enthralled with what Netanyahu had to say. I was sitting in front of some Democrats that were not standing. But even in those benches of Democrats that didn't want to stand when Netanyahu made his remarks, there were some that were clapping and standing anyway. So I think that the people that saw the speech saw, what leadership looks like, somebody representing their country, representing it to the best of their ability. And from what I heard, there was Americans that were calling up people that were present in that room, including myself, and asking why can't an American leader state America's case the way Israel's leader was able to state Israel's case.
Yeah, Netanyahu was certainly in his element there speaking to Congress, the only person, from what I understand, who spoke to a joint session 4 times. I'm talking about a foreign leader. You mentioned U.S.-Israel unity. That was one of the main themes. Netanyahu emphasized the enduring unity between the United States and Israel, vowing to continue fighting for victory and transforming the region with American and Arab partners. Let's take a look at that clip of his comments.
We will continue to work with the United States and our Arab partners to transform a troubled region from a backwater of repression, poverty, and war into a thriving oasis of dignity, prosperity, and peace. In this noble mission, as in many others, Israel will always remain America's indispensable ally. Through thick and thin,
Again, it was a long speech, a lot of things said. He also discussed Iran in detail, talked about anti-Semitism, the recent ruling at the ICJ, asking the U.S. to support Israel towards a total victory against Hamas. And they also mentioned something called the Abraham Alliance, piggybacking on the Abraham Accords, the deal signed between Israel and some of her neighbors, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco. So you brought up another idea to go up against Iran, the Abraham Alliance. Let's watch that clip, and then we'll get your comment, Alex.
the new alliance I envision would be a natural extension of the groundbreaking Abraham Accords. Those accords saw peace forged between Israel and 4 Arab countries, and they were supported by Republicans and Democrats alike. I have a name for this new alliance. I think we should call it the Abraham Alliance.
So again, the goal here, uniting countries in peace with Israel under U.S. leadership. Talk about that.
Well, I'm not certain that it's under U.S. leadership. I think that it's under Middle East leadership. After the speech, the Prime Minister came and briefed the Israeli reporters, and he said that he was calling for a NATO-style alliance of countries in the Middle East, all of whom want to push back against Iranian malign influence in the region and their march towards nuclear weapons. I saw it as an Israeli-led alliance. Yes, they would like participation of the United States if possible, but I think that we'll have to see if this will lead towards the creation of a real security alliance. As we discussed on the program last week, the 2015 speech in which he stood up against the Obama administration's entering into the JCPOA Iran nuclear deal ultimately was one of the foundational elements of the Abraham Accords. Netanyahu seemed to want to build off of that result and now trying to form a wider defense alliance across the Middle East.
One other topic, and again, we have so many. He touched on the U.S. protests which took place on campus this past spring, criticizing the protesters, criticizing the administration from the various colleges there and universities. He said that the protesters should be ashamed of themselves, and he said that they were useful idiots in service of Iran. Let's take a look at that clip.
When the tyrants of Tehran, who hang gays from cranes and murder women for not covering their hair, are praising, promoting, and funding you, you have officially become Iran's useful idiots.
So there you have it again, siding with the terrorists, failing to distinguish between Israel's defense and Hamas's attack on Israeli civilians. What can we take from that?
Well, as Netanyahu was delivering the speech, there were pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protests all throughout Washington. I saw them in front of the White House. We saw them in front of the Watergate Hotel where the Prime Minister was staying. And on the day of the speech itself, there was a large gathering of protesters outside the Union Station, the train station in downtown Washington, D.C. Now, protesters did not burn an Israeli flag at this event. What they did was they took the American flag off of the top of the roof of the station, burnt the American flag, and hung a Palestinian flag in its place. There were monuments in the area which were defaced with spray paint saying Hamas is coming. So I think that the pro-Hamas demonstrators made it very clear that this isn't only about Israel. They're not American-loving, peace-loving, seeking individuals who don't support the policies of the state of Israel. Think that Israel is committing, war crimes or acts of genocide. These are people that put the United States and Israel into the same boat. The same way they don't like the state of Israel, They do not like the United States of America, and I think it was a powerful message for all Americans to see that this is an anti-American protest just as much as it's an anti-Israel protest.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And again, we could talk about this speech for the entire program. We're not going to do that, but I would encourage everyone, whether you're a fan of Netanyahu, not a fan. I mean, again, he was in his element. I think this is one of the greatest speeches, if not the best, of his career. And he's had a long political career here in Israel. I would encourage people to take the 50 minutes and watch the speech. Also, there in the United States, Netanyahu meeting with outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden, meeting with the Vice President Kamala Harris, as well as former President Donald Trump, who's also running for president against Harris this fall. But let's focus, you also wrote about this on jns.org, on the meeting between Netanyahu and Harris. Again, I saw that journalists weren't really allowed. They were there for the photo op in the beginning, and then they were sent away. But nevertheless, there were reports coming out of the meeting itself. And then Harris made a statement following the meeting with Netanyahu. She started by stressing her support for Israel and then quickly turned, stressing the suffering in Gaza, making no demands on Hamas. And let's take it from there. And your reaction to the comments made by Kamala Harris after meeting with the Prime Minister.
Yeah, so, as you mentioned, the beginning of the meeting when Harris and Netanyahu were there together, there was no comments. Just Kamala Harris said, let's go. We have a lot to discuss. They had their meeting. Netanyahu and Harris's teams both said that the meeting was okay. There wasn't anything that they didn't expect in that meeting. But then after Netanyahu left the White House, Kamala Harris made a press statement without Netanyahu. She started by saying that it was a frank and constructive conversation with the prime minister. She tried to lay out her pro-Israel bona fides, always mentioning that she remembers raising funds to buy trees in Israel with the JNF, to plant trees with the JNF. And she did say that Israel has a right to defend itself, even against, and particularly against, Iran and its terror proxies. But then she added the caveat, and how Israel does so matter. She talked about the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. She talked about acute food shortage. The prime minister and senior officials briefed Israeli reporters after the meetings and after they saw the press statement by Harris. And senior Israeli officials told the reporters there that they were very disappointed by the tone of Kamala Harris's remarks. And they actually warned that those remarks could make it less likely to secure a hostage deal, because when the enemies of the Jewish people see that the United States and Israel are not lockstep, then that can actually drive the negotiating terms higher, because they see that they can get away with more. They see that the United States is putting pressure on the state of Israel only. So they worried that it will make it harder to get a ceasefire. They made it clear that they worried that you could see an escalation, a broader regional conflict as a result of her remarks. And now we see already just this morning, as we're talking, that there was the attack yesterday in Majdal Shams, killing 12. So, they were very disappointed with what they called the tone of the remarks. And they said that they said the most important thing is you can say whatever you want inside the meeting, but you keep it inside the meeting. Once you get out into public, you have to make it clear that the state of Israel and the United States are on the same page, that they have the same policies. If not, you're creating a very, very difficult and dangerous situation.
Yeah, anytime these leaders start by saying we support Israel and then they throw the word but, it's headed in the wrong direction. We've seen this time and time again under this administration, the Biden administration, and in previous administrations, thinking about Obama and others. Let's take a look at Vice President Harris's remarks after Netanyahu left the White House, and she did this on her own.
Let's get the deal done so we can get a ceasefire to end the war. Let's bring the hostages home, and let's provide much-needed relief to the Palestinian people. And ultimately, I remain committed to a path forward that can lead to a two-state solution.
There you have it again, stressing a two-state solution, not calling out Hamas by name. You had Ambassador David Friedman responding on Twitter, saying very, very harshly speaking to Kamala Harris, the vice president, "You are no friend of Israel. You've exhibited a shocking lack of command of the relevant facts. Your insensitivity to Jewish suffering and failure to attribute good and evil where they belong means you will never help to bring peace to this troubled region." I think that's very, very harsh, but also very, very true.
Yes, and I think the important point that you mentioned, that Kamala Harris did mention Hamas. She said what they did was horrific, but she did not call on them to do anything. She didn't call on them to release hostages, and she certainly didn't say that she supports Israel in its quest to remove Hamas as a political and a military power. So she made it clear in the speech that she is perfectly willing to permit Hamas to remain the ruling power, and even so was pushing on Israel to get to a ceasefire agreement immediately. When she talked about the terms of a ceasefire agreement, she did not mention the release of hostages that are alive. She only talked about Israeli military withdrawals, first in phase 1 from Palestinian population centers, and in phase 2, a complete withdrawal from the Gaza Strip.
If you're not talking about demands on Hamas, if you're not talking about Hamas being gone on the day after, then it really does not amount to a total victory for Israel. So we have serious problems, I think, down the road if she continues on this path. And again, the prime minister met with President Joe Biden, and I'm not sure how relevant that is. We can talk about that as well. But, he's basically a lame duck right now, sidelined. The comments that came from Biden were essentially from his spokespeople, National Security Council spokesman John Kirby, a spokesman from the State Department, Matthew Miller. Anything that came from Biden was not from himself. It was from his people. So I'm not sure how much he's relevant. I'll let you discuss that. But Kamala Harris, there's a long way to go until the elections in November, and there's a longer way to go until a new president comes into office in January. So she can do a lot of damage, I think, and I fear between now and November and now in January, as Israel's still trying to win a war against Hamas, as the situation has deteriorated exceptionally over the last 24 hours. I think we're in a really, really bad position, unfortunately, in terms of our relationship with the U.S. and the way they're speaking with Kamala Harris at the helm.
Well, the meeting between Netanyahu and Biden took on a different tone. Second, the president announced that he was essentially retiring and wasn't going to be seeking re-election. But you can imagine that meeting was not held just between Biden and Netanyahu themselves. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was there. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was there. I think that Blinken, and some of the others inside that administration, like Maher Bitar and Hadi Amr, they're not big fans of the state of Israel, and they're not big fans of Netanyahu. They're not fans of Israeli policy, and they want Israel to stop the war. They've made that clear. A lot of what Kamala Harris said in her remarks were direct carbon copies of things that Antony Blinken has said in the past. That line about "but how Israel does so matters." That's a line that I've heard Blinken say in the state of Israel on some of his visits. The meeting with Biden, Netanyahu had hoped to get the United States to agree to deliver some of the heavier munitions, the 2,000-pound bombs. The United States refused to do so even after the meeting. And the other thing is that the prime minister brought up was the sanctions that we've talked about against Israeli citizens, those living in Judea and Samaria, those that opposed and were protesting against the delivery of humanitarian aid to the Gazans. And America made it very clear in that meeting that the sanctions regime is going to continue.
On the other hand, you had Prime Minister Netanyahu flying down to Florida on Friday to meet with former president and current presidential hopeful President Donald Trump. And it was like night and day from the images I saw, from the quotes and whatnot. President Trump expressing his solidarity with Israel after October the 7th, pledging that when he returns to the White House, he'll make every effort to bring peace to the Middle East, combat anti-Semitism, stop it from spreading throughout college campuses across the U.S. Trump at the meeting also warned of a potential third world war based on the leadership in the United States. And let's take a look at that clip.
If we win, it'll be very simple. It's all going to work out and very quickly. If we don't, you're going to end up with major wars in the Middle East and maybe a third world war. You are closer to a third world war right now than at any time since the Second World War. You've never been so close because we have incompetent people running our country. Thank you very much, everybody.
Again, night and day, Alex. Very, very cordial. You saw the hugs and kisses with Sarah Netanyahu there as well, and the two seeming to get along, even though they've had some differences in the past and different comments President Trump has made or whatnot. It seems like they've patched things up, and those two can't get enough of each other, really, from what I saw on Friday in Florida. What's your take on that?
It was very important for Netanyahu to try to repair their relationship. I think that as far as Netanyahu is concerned, Trump is the best president that America's ever had for the state of Israel. And Trump, I think he just intuitively understood, that unlike what Kamala Harris said, she said in her remarks that the issue of Israel-Palestine is not binary. So I don't know what that means exactly, if it's not male, if it's not female, if it's whatever that is. But I think what she meant is that it's not black and white. And I think for Trump, the issue is black and white, that even if you are uncomfortable with some Israeli policies or some Israeli policy makers, that when it comes to what's going on in the Middle East, Israel is a force of good. Israel is an American ally. Israel gives as much to the United States as it gets. And what does Iran give to America? What do the Palestinians give to America? They don't give them anything, and they are promoting and exporting terror and destabilizing the entire region. And for that matter, they're getting the United States into a lot of hot water as well. So I think that Trump, he intuitively understands that it is binary and that Israel's the side of good and America's friend, and the Palestinians and Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and Iran are the enemies of America, and they need to be defeated.
Yeah, Trump criticizing Harris, also calling out American Jewry, saying that he does not understand how American Jews would support Kamala Harris. So I thought that was, he said it before, things like similar comments like that.
I think he looks at the pro-Israel evangelical Christians, who support Israel, and they keep Israel one of their top concerns, and they actually vote to a certain extent on the United States' support for Israel. That's one of the key issues for these voters. And you look at Jews, and if a Jew was going to vote on the issue of Israel alone, maybe they would vote one way over another way. But the truth is that Jews in the United States don't vote specifically on the singular issue of Israel. And Trump really doesn't understand why a lot of Jews won't vote for him, especially after he's already proven himself to be one of the best friends that Israel's ever had. I think you'll see more Jews voting for Trump this time around than in previous elections. But ultimately, the Jewish people remain an enigma to Donald Trump, just as Donald Trump remains an enigma to the Jewish people and much of America, for that matter.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I certainly would think that would be the case in terms of the voting trends in the U.S. amongst the Jewish people there, the American Jews, but time will tell. Turning back here to Israel, we are still at war with Hamas and Gaza, and for weeks now, we've been hearing there are 120 Israeli hostages still in the hands of Hamas, whether living or dead. Unfortunately, that number is now 115 as Israel recovers the bodies of 5 hostages, 5 Israelis who are known, now confirmed, to have been killed by Hamas. And there was actually a military operation in the town of Khan Yunis that began on Monday to combat the Hamas resurgence of that town. 5 Israelis, the bodies of 5 Israelis were recovered. So again, when I hear that number on the radio, when the number goes down, you hope that you're talking about hostages are alive and we're bringing back hostages to their homes. Unfortunately, we're seeing in several instances, that these are hostages which have been murdered by Hamas as well. So 5 hostages brought back home to Israel for proper burial.
Yeah, unfortunately, as you mentioned, many of the hostages, too many of the hostages probably are not alive in the Gaza Strip, though there has been evidence that some of them are alive, but the prime minister approving an operation to go and to try to recover these bodies. It was discovered through intelligence. There was basically an Arab living in Gaza that cued the IDF in, that there were bodies being kept, dead bodies being kept at some place in the tunnels deep in Khan Yunis, and there was an operation to recover them. And even recovering bodies, as horrific as it is, it does provide some sort of closure for those families, that are wondering every day whether their loved ones are alive or dead, and it allows for a proper burial, which on the spiritual level is also very important.
It certainly is, but it is heartbreaking to hear the news when you see that more and more hostages are not alive. And I think in this case there was a tunnel shaft, and the intelligence that Israel had led them to the tunnel shaft opening where these hostages, the bodies of these hostages were being kept underground. Just very, very sad. We're nearly out of time. We're just one last story here. We'll see how relevant it is as we go forward. And we've had similar in the past about the relationship between Hamas and Fatah. Now they have signed a national unity declaration. Fatah and Hamas, the Palestinian Authority and Hamas in Beijing, signed a deal. Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz criticized the declaration, stating Israel's security would remain in its own hands, as these two, I guess, are preparing for the day after signing some sort of deal in which they would share control of Gaza. And to this point, Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it absolutely clear that Israel must maintain control of Gaza to some extent. And we cannot count on the Palestinian Authority. We cannot have a Hamastan, and we cannot have a Fatahstan in Gaza, if you will. That can't happen. That is the goal, the third goal of Prime Minister Netanyahu, making sure that Gaza is no longer a place where terrorism can be launched against the Jewish state.
Well, I think that there's a lot to this. First of all, that Fatah, which is Mahmoud Abbas's political party, signing a unity agreement with Hamas, it sends a signal to the international community, to Israel, that Fatah and Hamas, have the same ideology, which is to defeat the state of Israel, and that Fatah, if they take over Gaza, remember they took over Gaza in 2005, and then they lost control of Gaza to Hamas. Now they're saying, if you can't beat them, join them. We recognize that Hamas might be stronger than us. They might have more popular support than Fatah. At the same time, Fatah has more, international support and is the source of funding. So they're saying, hey, let's just work together. So they're basically saying, we are Hamas. We are the same thing. And that strengthens Netanyahu's position not to give over leadership of Gaza to the Palestinian Authority, because the Palestinian Authority is telling you, we are working with Hamas. We have signed an agreement with them. We are and them are one. So anybody that thinks that the Palestinian Authority is different than Hamas, now they see that the opposite is true. They are two sides of the same coin. It's also important to note that this was signed in China. They're trying to bring China into the region because they don't feel like the United States is the power that they trust in the region. So that's another very dangerous step. So you're seeing here that the Palestinians, both the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, Iran, Hezbollah, Houthis, they align together with Russia and with China. And together, this is really an axis of evil. And these are all the enemies of the United States. So Fatah, Hamas siding with China, not caring much about the United States and its presence in the region, and demonstrating that they're going to continue the war against Israel in the Middle East.
Yeah, I just wrote that down. I was about to bring that up, that it was deliberate, 100% deliberate, that this signing took place in Beijing. It was not by accident. That was definitely a symbol and a sign of things to come, and a sign of where Fatah and Hamas, where they are headed, and the United States not being in the equation, with Russia and China on the other side, and Iran as well. I think that's going to do it for today, Alex. I hope you have a safe flight back, and please God, we will meet in studio next week here in Jerusalem. Have a safe trip, and I want to send a big shout out to Ryan Lifshitz, who does everything behind the scenes here on JNS TV. Continue to watch all the amazing programming that we have to offer on JNS TV. Also, check out the latest news on jns.org. Alex, just any other articles before you get on that plane and come back? Any summarizations? Anything else you're going to cover before you get on the flight? On the El Al, I'm assuming, yes?
No comment on that one. But I did. It was a privilege to cover this for JNS at the White House, at the Congress. I filed many articles from the U.S. during this trip. I am, though, very much excited to get back here. I think it was very interesting, the timing of this trip, the importance of this trip. I think Netanyahu represented himself like a true leader, a true statesman. And it's hard to see at this point, who else could step into those shoes and to do the job that Netanyahu did in Washington, D.C. this past week.
I'd like to hear about it from you in person next week. Alex Trayman, CEO of JNS. My name is Josh Haston, broadcasting from Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. Keep those prayers coming for the IDF soldiers who are protecting us 24/7 here in Israel on 7 different fronts. Keep the prayers coming. Thanks so much. Have a great week, everybody. Be safe. Shalom, shalom from Jerusalem.